Hey everyone, in today's video, I'm going to show you how I edit my portraits. So without further ado, let me hop into Lightroom and start editing. Okay, so this photo here I actually posted to my Instagram and so many of you guys loved it. I received so many compliments on the edit on this one. So I decided that I'll go ahead and make a video showing you guys how I go about editing my portraits and how I go from a super ugly looking photo like this to a natural looking photo like this. So let me reset the photo and we'll go back to how it was taken. As you can see, the photo looks horrible. The background is super blown out because for my portraits, the only thing that matters in the final photos is the model, how detailed, how sharp the model is, not the background, not anything else, but the model. So I did expose it a little bit higher so I can retain as much details as possible for her. And because I've been shooting with the EOS R for a couple of years now, I know that the EOS R has great dynamic range, so I knew that I can still get some details back in the overexposed areas. So before we start editing, the first thing I like to do is scroll all the way down to our lens corrections and make sure that remove chromatic aberration is checked. Also, enable profile corrections is checked. Now the reason why I do this to the photo before any other adjustments is because the last thing I want is to be editing a photo, get a really good edit that I'm proud of, and then realize that the photo is a little bit distorted, come down to lens corrections to check it, and then now some of my colors and my exposure is all off, meaning I have to go back and re-edit the entire photo. So that's why I go ahead and do this at the very starting. Next, we're gonna scroll all the way up and head over to our basic adjustments tab. In our basic adjustments tab, I like to adjust our highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks, and then go up to our exposure and change our exposure. So we're gonna go ahead and drag our highlights down just to get some detail back in the overexposed areas. And I'm thinking we're gonna have to go all the way down to -100. As for our shadows, we're gonna bring them up to about 50. 50 looks good. We'll leave it around there, 49. And then we're gonna go down to our whites and we're just gonna, again, bring this down to get some detail back into our image. If we look around our plant here, when the whites are at 0, you can see that there's hardly any detail. But when we drag our whites back, we get some of that detail back. So again, I think we're gonna leave whites at -100, just like our highlights. And then we're gonna go down to our blacks and we're just going to adjust our blacks. We don't wanna wash out the image. We still want it to have that punchy, contrasty look. So we're just gonna leave it at 0. Now that that's set, we're gonna go up to our exposure and just adjust our exposure a little bit, maybe to just until where she looks good. Maybe 20. As for our contrast slider, I hardly ever touch the contrast slider. If I want to add any contrast to our photo, I like doing that in our tone curve. Next, we're going to scroll down to our texture, clarity, and dehaze slider. What I like to do is adjust the clarity to about -10 for almost all my portraits, just to take the edge off and make it a little more dreamier. Then I like going to our texture slider and adjusting this to about +10, which is the complete opposite of what we did in clarity, just because we want to get some of that detail that the clarity took off. Next, I'll usually add some haze with the dehaze slider, but for this photo, because it's already kind of washed out a little bit because it was so overexposed, we're gonna leave dehaze at 0. Vibrance and saturation sliders I usually don't really touch. If I want to make any hue and saturation changes, I'll do that in our HSL tab. Next is the tone curve, and this is where I like to add my contrast. What I like to do with the tone curve is make a slight S curve just to bring some contrast into the photo, and then drop my white point, not too much because it starts getting really ugly, but just ever so slightly. Now, one thing I'm not liking with the photo right now is the background. All this white area just seems a little dull, and I want to make it look like there was some light coming in through the windows. So one thing I'm going to do is go back up to our highlights and white slider and just adjust these a tad bit. Also, if you're having a hard time adjusting your highlights, whites, or shadows, or blacks, and you just want to let Lightroom automatically do it for you, it's super easy. Just hold Shift on your keyboard and double click on highlights, and Lightroom will automatically adjust it for you. It doesn't work all the time, as you just saw, but after we've made our tone curve adjustment, I like going all the way down to our calibration tab to change up some of the colors before heading into the HSL tab. And basically what I'm gonna do here is just balance out her skin tone a little bit. I don't know if you guys can see this, but her skin tone is a little bit green, and we're just gonna go down to our blue primary and adjust this to about -10. And as you can see, it brought back a little bit more saturation into her skin. If we zoom into her face and we uncheck the calibration tool, you can see it's just a little bit green on her cheek and above her eye here. And then if we check the calibration tool back on, it just balances out the skin tone, bringing it more to the pink and magenta side instead of the green side. And it also adds just a little bit more saturation. And then what I like to do is go over to our green primary slider and adjust this. As you can see, if you go to the left, it makes her more green, and then to the right, more pink. So what I like to do is just balance it out even more and do the opposite of blue primary, probably about +10. And as you can see, her skin tone just looks way more natural. There's no weird green hues in there, and it just looks like her natural skin tone. So if we go ahead and uncheck the calibration tool, you can see that her skin looks a little green. It's unsaturated and kind of dull. And if we recheck the calibration tool, you can see that her skin has that saturation, and she doesn't have any weird green tones in her skin. Next, I like to adjust the shadows tint slider. And what this basically does is exactly what it says it does. It adds tint to your shadows, kind of like if you were doing any split toning or color grading. So what I'm gonna do here is add some green into our shadows to get that film type look. I'm not gonna go overboard, anything like this. I'm just going to do a very subtle adjustment, maybe around 10. If we zoom into her hair, you can see that it just got a little darker with that greenish tint in there. And then if we go to her shirt and uncheck this, you can see that it's a little bit warmer. And then if we check it back on, it's got that greenish bluish tint. After that's all said and done, then I go back up to our HSL tab. In the HSL tab, I don't really do too much here. I'll adjust the hue in the orange slider here just to make her skin a little bit more to the red side instead of green. And we'll just do a very subtle change, like -5. However, I think the photo looks good as it is. I don't think I really need to adjust any of the colors. I kind of like the green plants here. There's no need to make them more green or more yellow. I think everything is just properly balanced. And honestly, I think that's the only adjustment I'm gonna make in the HSL tab. Next, we'll go down to our detail tab. And what I like to do is add about 75 sharpening to every single one of my images. And then I'll go to our masking slider, hold Option, and then drag this to the right. And basically what I'm looking for is just to see what's gonna be sharpened. And I don't want the background sharpened, just her and the motorcycle. After that, I don't really need any noise reduction or vignetting. So we're gonna go up to my favorite tab, which is the color grading tab. Now this is a tab where you can really stylize your photo however you want. We have our 3 wheels, shadows, midtones, and highlights, and we can add any color into those areas. So what I like to do is add some green or teal into the shadows, again, to get that natural film look. And I'll probably do something like that. Then I'll add some oranges into our highlights, but not too much because we've already added some more orange and saturation into her skin using the calibration tab and the HSL tab. So we're just gonna do a very little amount of color grading for the highlights. After we're done in the color grading tab, then I like to go down and add some grain to almost every single one of my photos. Somewhere around 20, it's not too much where it's noticeable, but the reason why I like adding grain is because it actually brings back some detail that we may have lost. Because it was taken so far away, you can see that we really don't have much detail in her skin. It looks really smooth, but if we turn on what we did with our grain, you can see that we have a little bit more detail and sharpness in her skin. And that's basically it for the photo. There's one last thing that I like to do for every single one of my photos, and that's to go up to the masking tab and click on select subject. After it masks the subject, I just like adding a little bit more contrast to her to separate her a little bit more from the background and maybe just some clarity. And that's basically the photo. There's just one last thing that I've been dying to do, and that's just to bump up the temperature a little bit to give it more of a warmer look. Somewhere around 67, we'll leave it at 6,792. If we check the before and after, you can see that we went from such a horrible, ugly looking photo to something so natural and so beautiful. And that's how I edit my portraits to get a clean, natural look. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button to see more content like this, and hit that bell to be notified when I post a new video. I'll see you in the next one.